we have a disclaimer right on the front. And it basically says, you know, get your own people. You're at your own risk. This was done by management. It wasn't done by, it was done by management. So don't rely on the statement that you're getting. Right. And by the way, it goes on for like a page and a half. It's a very big disclaimer. It's a very powerful disclaimer.
Don't rely on the statement that I signed off on. That is from the same Fox News interview where the former guy talked about mentally declassifying documents. But maybe this right there is what we really should be talking about more. Instead of denying allegations in the Letitia James lawsuit, Trump's just blaming the banks for not catching him in his big fat lies.
By the way, they got paid back. Just so you know.
Paid back. Nobody got harmed.
I never got a default. No, I paid them back because we have a lot of cash. I paid them back. I paid many of them off. I have very little debt, unbelievably little debt.
We don't know what little means, but we do know when he left office, he owed hundreds of millions of dollars. Joining me is David Enrich, business investigations editor for the New York Times. He wrote the new book, Servants of the Damned, Giant Law Firms, Donald Trump, and the Corruption of Justice. David, that's not the only book you wrote. You wrote one specifically on Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump's biggest lender. What do you think about this argument that he's saying they should have known better? He shouldn't have lied, but they should have known better. It's why the majority of banks wouldn't do business with him, because they knew he was lying about his assets, and Deutsche Bank also knew it.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, there's some truth to that argument, right? I mean, Deutsche Bank should have known better. Trump, prior to Deutsche Bank making hundreds of millions of dollars of loans to Trump starting around 2011, 2012, Trump had repeatedly defaulted on previous loans to Deutsche Bank. So the notion that Deutsche Bank was going into this blind and was not skeptical at all about Trump's finances is just not true. And I think that, frankly, is one of the weaknesses probably in the Attorney General's suit against Trump. I mean, Deutsche Bank executives who I've spoken to said that they recognized that Trump was inflating the values of his assets, and they wrote it down deliberately, kind of trying to be more conservative. But one of the fascinating things to me, and I've spent years studying Deutsche Bank, and one of the fascinating things reading kind of the details that are in this 200-plus page lawsuit that was filed yesterday is that there is a whole lot of granular detail that shows exactly what Trump was doing and the Trump family members were doing as they tried to kind of turn one arm of Deutsche Bank against another, trying to turn one bank against another. And they were really using the representations that were in their financial statements to try to argue not only for more money, but also for lower interest rates. And it appears from what I'm seeing in these lawsuits that they were very effective in that. So even though Trump can argue that the banks should have known better, which is fair enough, what he can't argue is that the banks didn't pay attention to the financial information that he was putting forward, because there's clear records that they did.
You just said Trump and Trump family members. OK, that means Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, who were officers in this company. So when Bill Barr goes on to, why are they going after the kids? These aren't kids. They themselves were personally involved in a number of these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they're grown-ups, right? And so as kids makes it sound like project in D.C. She was the one who was having, from what these documents in the lawsuit make it sound like, was the one handling the lion's share of the communication between the Trump organization on the one hand and Rosemary Vrablic, who was the private banker at Deutsche Bank that was kind of the account manager on this. And she was directly involved. Her husband, Jared Kushner, was the one who made the introduction of Rosemary Vrablic to the Trump family. And Don Jr. and Eric were also involved. So this was a family enterprise. There's no question that the family was fully aware of what the patriarch was doing with kind of hyping and exaggerating his asset values in order to get more money for lower interest rates. And so I think the question, I don't know where legally that puts either Trump or his adult children, but there is no doubt that they were all participating in this and doing everything they could to get as much money as possible, as cheaply as possible, from Deutsche Bank.
So no credible banks might want to lend to this guy going forward, but Trump is able to continue to fundraise. He was fundraising yesterday off the suit from Tish James, despite the fact that there is another ongoing investigation into how he's spending the money he's raised from his PAC. Who are these donors? And at some point, are the donors like the banks like, dude, if you're going to give this guy money, buyer beware. Like, he's going to spend it wherever the heck he wants. You don't care?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. And we're seeing this play out in a bunch of different forms, right? We've learned that Trump has managed to repay most of what he owes Deutsche Bank by getting some other kind of third tier lenders to cough up hundreds of millions of dollars to lend to him. We see what he's doing with the fundraising appeals off of this lawsuit for his PACs that are already under investigation. We're seeing this also with the social media company that he's trying to get off the ground, where the fundraising behind that is also under investigation by government agencies, including the Securities and Exchange Commission. So basically everywhere Trump is trying to raise money there, and this is a pattern that goes back decades, there has been kind of a trail of accusations and investigations, in some cases wrongdoing, left in his wake. And I think that's probably continuing now.
But at the same time, people keep writing him checks like the Saudis. All of these golf tournaments at Trump clubs in the last year has given him a ton of money. So right now, behind the scenes, given the financial pressure he's under, do you think we're likely to see a fire sale of his assets? I mean, he still owns a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that he does own a lot, and I don't think it would have to be a fire sale. I mean, I think he surprised me by how much he got for the luxury hotel that he developed in Washington, D.C. I think a lot of his properties, while maybe his brand value has been diminished by how polarizing he is, I think that underlying assets probably have a lot of value. And look, I mean, people have underestimated Trump, myself included, in the financial space over and over and over again. And so I'm going to try and be cautious not to do that again. And he certainly, if he needed to drum up a bunch of cash to pay lawyers or to, pay back loans, I think he would probably be able to do so, at least for now. But, if all of these legal crises that he's facing really come to fruition and, it's possible he could be in much more severe financial straits.
But as of now, he is not in financial straits, nor is his daughter and son-in-law. Reminder, Jared Kushner now running billions of dollars for MBS. David Enrich, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us.